If you've ever loved an avoidant, you know the biggest fight isn't with them, it's with yourself, the part that keeps hoping, waiting, and trying to earn consistency. This first keynote matters because it names the hidden battlefield that most people never talk about. On the surface, it looks like the avoidant is the problem, their silence, their distance, their mixed signals, their inability to stay steady. But the deeper pain is what their pattern does to you internally. It turns your mind into a constant negotiation. It turns your heart into a project manager. It turns your life into a waiting room where you're always on alert for the next shift in their mood. And when you live in that state long enough, you don't just miss them, you start losing yourself. Because the fight becomes, do I text or do I stay quiet? Do I bring it up or do I let it go? Do I set a boundary or do I risk pushing them away? Do I act like I'm fine or do I tell the truth? And none of those questions are about love. They're about survival. They're about trying to keep the connection alive without triggering the disappearance you've learned to fear. This keynote hooks the viewer because it speaks directly to a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of heartbreak alone, but the exhaustion of self-monitoring. When you're with an avoidant, you often become hyper-aware of your tone, your timing, your emotions, your needs. You start measuring your words like they're explosives. You start softening your truth so it doesn't feel like pressure. You start delaying difficult conversations because you've learned that closeness can lead to withdrawal. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to treat your needs like inconveniences you have to apologize for. That's the internal fight. The fight between your desire to be honest and your fear of being abandoned. The fight between your dignity and your attachment. The fight between your standards and your hope. Hope is the dangerous one because hope feels like love, but in avoidant dynamics, hope can become a trap. You keep hoping the warm version of them is the real version. You keep hoping the distance is temporary. You keep hoping that if you just understand them better, they'll stop pulling away. You start chasing the potential, not the reality. You start loving what you believe the relationship could be, instead of what it currently is. And the reason this becomes such a brutal fight is because the avoidant pattern is intermittent. It's not all bad. If it were all bad, you'd leave. But it's good enough sometimes to keep you invested. They come close just enough to give you relief. They say something sweet. They show up for a moment. They make you feel chosen, and your nervous system locks onto that feeling like water in a desert. Then they pull away again, and you're back in the cycle, trying to earn the next moment of closeness. This is why the viewer keeps waiting. They're not weak. Their nervous system has been trained. The highs and lows create attachment. The unpredictability creates obsession. The uncertainty keeps the mind looping because the mind thinks, if I can just figure out the rule, I can prevent the pain. So you analyze. You blame yourself, you replay. You try to be perfect. You become easier. You become smaller. And that's where the real loss happens, not when they pull away, but when you start shaping yourself around their avoidance. When you begin to believe that your peace depends on their behavior. When you start asking for less than you need, because you're afraid asking for what you need will cost you the relationship. The keynote also highlights the deepest misconception. People think the goal is to win the avoidant. But you can't win someone by losing yourself. If you have to abandon your voice to keep them, that's not a win, that's a trade. If you have to accept crumbs to stay connected, that's not love, that's survival. And the viewer needs to hear this early, because it sets the tone for the entire video. It shifts the focus from, how do I make them choose me, to, how do I stop choosing pain? And the phrase, trying to earn consistency, is critical because it reveals the unhealthy contract many viewers have unknowingly entered. They've been behaving like consistency is a prize they must qualify for, rather than a basic requirement in a healthy relationship. They've been over-functioning, over-explaining, over-giving, thinking that if they prove their loyalty, consistency will eventually be rewarded. But consistency isn't a reward. It's a standard. It's not something you should have to earn by suffering. So this keynote is the emotional wake-up call. It tells the viewer, the real struggle is not convincing an avoidant to stay. The real struggle is learning to stop bargaining with your own worth. Because the moment you stop fighting yourself, the moment you stop negotiating your standards, the moment you stop treating your needs like threats, is the moment your power starts returning. Stay to the end, because I'm going to show you the exact point where avoidants lose control of the dynamic, and you win your power back without begging, without chasing, without drama. This second keynote matters because it sets a promise your viewer's nervous system is desperate to hear, that there is a specific turning point. Not a vague, just love yourself message. Not a motivational quote, but a real moment in the pattern where the power shifts. People who love avoidance often feel like the relationship is a maze. They keep taking different turns, different approaches, different tones, different levels of patience, and they still end up at the same wall, distance. So the idea that there is an exact point feels like oxygen. It creates immediate curiosity because it implies there's a hidden lever the viewer hasn't been shown yet. And this keynote also heals shame, because chasing and begging don't happen because someone is weak. They happen because someone is wired for connection. When an avoidant pulls away, your attachment system goes into alarm. You don't just miss them, your body feels unsafe. You want to restore closeness the way you want to restore air. So you explain, you reach, you overgive, you apologize for your feelings. You try to be easy. And when it doesn't work, you feel embarrassed, like you gave too much power away. This keynote says, you're not going to win your power back by becoming colder, and you're not going to win it back by becoming louder. You're going to win it back by becoming clearer. That's why, without begging, without chasing, without drama, is such a powerful phrase. It tells the viewer they don't have to perform pain to be taken seriously. They don't have to fight to be valued. They don't have to prove their love with suffering. They can step into a calm form of strength that doesn't require emotional exhaustion. And for someone who has been living in an anxious loop, that's not just attractive, it's relieving. Now, let's unpack why avoidance, loose control, is the right language here. Many avoidants don't consciously try to control you, but their pattern controls the relationship. Distance becomes the lever. Withdrawal becomes the regulator. When they feel overwhelmed, they retreat. When you respond by chasing, the retreat works. It lowers their pressure and it increases your investment. Over time, the relationship becomes organized around their comfort. Your needs become negotiable. Their need for space becomes non-negotiable. Their silence becomes a tool, even if they don't intend it. And you end up in a position where you're always reacting, always adjusting, always managing the temperature to keep them from disappearing again. So the exact point where control shifts is when you stop reacting to distance as an emergency. That's the real turning point. Because the dynamic only stays alive if your nervous system keeps doing the chasing. Their withdrawal only has power if it triggers your pursuit. Their silence only has power if it makes you abandon your standards. Their mixed signals only have power if you keep interpreting them as hope. This keynote sets up the idea that the power shift is not you winning an argument. It's you changing your behavior. It's you stepping out of the emotional bargaining. It's you becoming unpredictable in the only way that matters, not by playing games, but by no longer being guaranteed. And that's why this keynote is such a retention engine. It holds a promise that the viewer wants to stay for. Where is that point? What does it look like? How do I do it? What do I say? What do I stop doing? It also implies that the viewer's current strategy is keeping the avoidant comfortable, and that there is a strategy that flips it without cruelty. That's incredibly compelling. It also prepares the viewer for what they're going to feel when they try it. Because winning your power back will feel like loss at first. When you stop chasing, your body will panic. When you stop begging, your mind will scream. When you refuse drama, your emotions will feel trapped inside you. And the viewer needs to know that this discomfort is part of the shift, not proof they're doing it wrong. This keynote helps them stay with the process because it frames the goal clearly, to reclaim power without emotional collapse. And there's a deeper truth embedded here that makes the keynote hit even harder. You don't need the avoidant to change first for the power shift to happen. Most people wait for the avoidant to show up consistently before they feel safe enough to set standards. This keynote reverses that. It says you become consistent with yourself first. You become stable in your boundaries first. You become calm in your response first. And that's what changes the dynamic, because it removes the easy access that kept the cycle alive. So the second keynote is a promise of liberation. It tells the viewer, the win isn't forcing someone to love you properly. The win is ending the pattern that made you chase for basic certainty. The win is reclaiming your dignity in a way that doesn't require you to harden your heart, only to protect it. Here's the truth. Avoidants win through one thing, distance. And if you chase that distance, you lock the pattern in and teach them they can pull away and still keep full access. This third keynote is the spine of the entire message, because it explains the hidden mechanics behind why avoidant relationships feel so addictive and so painful at the same time. It's not just that they withdraw, it's what their withdrawal does to you and what your response teaches them. Distance is how an avoidant regulates. When intimacy rises, when emotions deepen, when expectations become real, their nervous system often interprets it as pressure. Not always because you did something wrong, but because closeness demands presence, vulnerability, and emotional responsibility. So their body looks for safety. And safety for them often feels like space. They don't always say, I'm scared of closeness. They say, I need time. They say, I'm overwhelmed. They say, I'm busy. But underneath, The pattern is the same. They create distance to calm themselves. Now here's where the win happens. The avoidant feels relief when they pull away. The pressure drops, the intensity goes down, and if your nervous system is anxious, their distance triggers panic. Your mind starts looping. Your body feels unsafe. You feel like you're losing them, so you chase. You explain. You ask for clarity. You send the extra message. You soften your needs. You apologize for your feelings. You try to become easier. You try to pull them closer so you can breathe again. And the moment you chase, two lessons get reinforced. They learn, distance works. It gives them relief and it keeps you invested. You learn, I have to pursue to feel safe. Your peace becomes dependent on their response. That's why this pattern becomes so powerful. It's a feedback loop. Their withdrawal triggers your pursuit. Your pursuit confirms their need to withdraw. And the relationship becomes organized around this push-pull rhythm. They get to control the closeness by stepping back. You become the one doing the emotional work to keep the bond alive. This is what people don't realize. The avoidance distance often becomes the thermostat of the relationship. When they pull away, you adjust yourself. You lower your needs. You become more agreeable. You become more patient. You become more careful. You do it because you want the warmth back. But while you're adjusting, they're not learning consistency. They're learning that inconsistency is survivable because you will fill the gaps. That's the meaning of full access. Full access means they still get your attention, your loyalty, your emotional openness, your reassurance, even while they are being partial. They can go quiet, then return and receive warmth. They can withdraw, then come back and be comforted. They can avoid accountability and still be welcomed. And every time that happens, the pattern hardens. Not because they're evil, but because the nervous system repeats what works. So when you chase distance, you lock the pattern in. You make it safe for them to remain avoidant. You remove the consequence that would normally create growth. In a healthy relationship, inconsistency costs access. In an avoidant loop, inconsistency often gets rewarded with extra effort from you. You try harder to earn the closeness. You try harder to prove you're not a threat. You try harder to show your understanding. And while that may come from love, it trains the dynamic in the worst way. This keynote also shows the viewer why they feel so obsessed. Because the avoidant doesn't give consistent closeness, they give intermittent closeness. Intermittent closeness is the most addictive pattern for the human brain. You don't know when the reward is coming, so you keep checking. You keep trying. You keep hoping. The warm moments feel like a jackpot. The cold moments feel like withdrawal. You start living for the next text, the next call, the next sign that you're chosen again. And because you've had moments of warmth, your brain keeps believing the warmth is the real them. You chase the high, but the cost is your self-respect. The cost is your stability. The cost is your peace. So the key shift inside this keynote is the understanding that the goal is not to chase them into closeness. The goal is to stop letting their distance control your behavior. The moment you stop chasing, you remove the reward that made distance effective. Their distance stops producing your pursuit. And once that happens, the avoidant loses the win of regulation without consequence. And this is where the viewer's power returns. Because power in this context is not dominance, it's self-governance. It's the ability to stay steady when someone pulls away. It's the ability to hold your standards without panic. It's the ability to connect access to responsibility. And when you do that, you teach a new lesson. Distance doesn't get full access anymore. That lesson is the turning point. That's where the dynamic either evolves into something healthier or ends, and either outcome frees you. So where do they lose? They lose the moment distance stops working. When you stop feeding the cycle with your emotional labor, and you change the one thing that controls everything, access. This keynote is the turning point because it tells the viewer exactly where power actually lives in an avoidant relationship. Power doesn't live in who loves more. It lives in who can tolerate uncertainty without abandoning themselves. Power doesn't live in who can explain better. It lives in who can stay steady when the other person pulls away. And that's why avoidants win through distance, because distance triggers you to chase, and chasing turns your love into a resource they can rely on even when they're inconsistent. But the moment you stop feeding that cycle, distance loses its power. It stops being a lever. It stops producing the same effect. And that's when the avoidant loses control of the dynamic. Because the dynamic was never controlled by their feelings. It was controlled by your reaction. Let's talk about emotional labor, because most viewers don't realize how much they're carrying. Emotional labor is the constant effort to keep the relationship stable when the other person keeps destabilizing it. It's you initiating contact after they withdraw. It's you softening conversations so they don't feel pressured. It's you reassuring them after they hurt you. It's you pretending you're fine when you're not. It's you swallowing needs so the connection doesn't break. It's you doing repair alone, giving forgiveness without accountability, rebuilding closeness without a plan, resetting without change. In other words, emotional labor is you making their avoidance survivable. And the avoidant doesn't have to be cruel for this to happen. They just have to be inconsistent, and you just have to keep compensating. Over time, the relationship becomes a system where their withdrawal is met with your extra effort. Their silence is met with your explanation. Their distance is met with your closeness. And that system makes them comfortable because they can regulate with space and still keep the relationship benefits. So where do they lose? They lose at the exact moment you stop compensating. Not with anger, not with revenge, with calm. You stop sending the extra message. You stop chasing the silence. You stop offering immediate reassurance after being hurt. You stop reopening the door without repair. You stop granting full closeness to partial effort. And then you change access, which is the master switch. Access is the emotional privileges someone gets with you. Your time, your attention, your reassurance, your warmth, your availability. Your girlfriend-boyfriend experience. In the old dynamic, they had full access even when they gave partial presence. They could disappear and return to the same version of you. They could avoid responsibility and still receive closeness. They could keep you in uncertainty and still enjoy your loyalty. Changing access means you connect closeness to responsibility. You don't remove love, you remove entitlement. You don't become cold, you become structured. You don't punish them, you protect yourself. And this is why distance stops working. Because distance works only when it still keeps access. If they pull away and you chase, access remains. If they pull away and you wait calmly, access becomes conditional. And conditional access forces a choice. Either they learn to communicate and stay consistent, or they lose the privileges they used to receive without earning them. This is where many viewers will feel fear because it feels like risk. They think, if I change access, they'll leave. And yes, some will. But listen, the ones who leave because you changed access were never attached to you in a healthy way. They were attached to your availability. They were attached to the comfort of knowing they could pull away without consequence. They were attached to the version of you that kept giving while they stayed half present. So the win is not keeping them at any cost. The win is ending the system where your cost is your peace. And here's what makes this keynote so engaging. It tells the viewer that the avoidant will notice the change even if you say nothing. Because your behavior is different. You're not reacting the same. You're not chasing the same. The cycle doesn't have its fuel. And avoidants are extremely sensitive to shifts in access. They may not be sensitive to your words, but they are sensitive to your availability. This is why they often test you after you change access. They hover. They send a casual message. They try to reset without repair. They want to see if the old system is still running. And this is exactly where the avoidant loses or wins. If you collapse back into full access, the system restarts and distance works again. If you stay calm and require responsibility, the system changes permanently. So the moment distance stops working is the moment you stop treating withdrawal like a crisis and start treating it like information. Information that tells you whether this person can meet the basics. Information that tells you whether they can handle adult communication. Information that tells you whether love with them can be safe. That is where they lose and you win. Because you stop being managed by their pattern and you start living by your standards. I'll show you the crossroads where they test you with hovering and breadcrumbs, and the calm standards that force only two outcomes. They step up with real consistency or they step out. This keynote matters because it prepares the viewer for the most confusing part of the entire process. The moment you finally change access and the avoidant suddenly reappears. People think the hardest part is walking away or stopping the chase, but often the hardest part is what happens right after you stop. Because that's when the avoidant feels the shift. That's when the old system stops giving them comfort. That's when they notice they can't pull away and still keep full access. And that's when the tests begin. Hovering is not always romance. Breadcrumbs are not always love. Most viewers misread these moments because they are starving for certainty. A single hey can feel like a miracle when you've been living on silence. A like on a story can feel like hope. A random question can feel like the door opening. And your nervous system, craving relief, wants to sprint back into closeness. That's why this is a crossroads, because the decision you make here determines whether the cycle ends or restarts. An avoidant tests for one reason, to see if access is still available without responsibility. Testing is safer than repairing. Testing lets them get reassurance without admitting fault. Testing lets them feel connection without facing the discomfort of accountability. So they send something small, something casual, something that doesn't require them to talk about what happened. And if you respond with full warmth, full availability, full intimacy, the test works. They learn, I still have access, and the old dynamic returns because distance becomes powerful again. This is where calm standards change everything. Calm standards are not emotional speeches. Calm standards are rules you live by. They are the quiet backbone that keeps you from collapsing under a tiny signal. Calm standards sound like, I'm open to talking, but I'm not doing the disappearing cycle anymore. Calm standards sound like, if we're reconnecting, we need to address what happened and what will be different. Calm standards sound like, I want something real, so I move slowly with people who are inconsistent. Notice how calm standards aren't punishments. They're not meant to make them suffer. They're meant to make the relationship safe. Now, why do calm standards force only two outcomes? Because they remove the gray zone. The gray zone is where avoidant relationships survive. The gray zone is not fully together, not fully apart, not committed, not gone. The gray zone is where you keep hoping while they keep hovering. And the gray zone is expensive. It costs your dignity, your sleep, your focus, your self-trust. Calm standards shut down the gray zone because they say, closeness comes with responsibility. Either you can participate in that, or you can't. So when you hold calm standards, the avoidant faces a choice. If they have capacity, they step up. Stepping up is not just saying, I miss you. Stepping up is communicating proactively, not disappearing, acknowledging impact, offering a plan, showing consistent effort after the moment passes. It's repairing instead of resetting. It's showing up when it's uncomfortable, not just when it's convenient. It's being willing to be responsible for the bond, not just enjoy it. If they don't have capacity, they step out. And stepping out can look like disappearing again. Becoming cold, calling you too much, blaming you for making it serious, avoiding the conversation, or keeping you in casual contact without commitment. They step out because calm standards remove their comfort. They can't keep the benefits without the work. And when someone can't keep the benefits without the work, they often prefer to leave rather than grow. This is the moment the viewer needs to hear something deeply freeing. Stepping out is not failure. It's clarity. It's the relationship revealing what it truly is. And the reason this is a win is because it saves the viewer from repeating the same emotional injury for months or years. It saves them from slowly shrinking to keep someone who only stays when it's easy. This keynote also helps the viewer resist the emotional trap of breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are designed to keep you emotionally invested without requiring them to become consistent. It's just enough connection to prevent you from fully moving on. It's just enough warmth to keep you hoping. It's just enough contact to keep you waiting. And that's why breadcrumbs are so dangerous, because they keep the wound open. They keep you in the middle. They keep you from healing. So at the crossroads, the viewer's job is not to prove anything. Their job is to observe, to stay calm, to require responsibility, and to remember that real love doesn't panic when you ask for structure. Real love doesn't disappear when you ask for consistency. Real love doesn't call accountability pressure. Real love chooses you with intention, not with occasional tests. That's why this keynote is so powerful. It makes the process feel simple. Not easy, but simple. Hold calm standards. Watch what they do. And let their response tell you everything you need to know. And the final twist will set you free. Because if they only come back when you're disappearing, they didn't love your presence. They loved your availability. And that's where you stop being optional. This keynote is the one that breaks the spell, because it exposes the painful truth behind so many avoidant cycles. The return is not always proof of love. Sometimes it's proof of access. And once you see that clearly, you stop getting hooked by the same pattern wearing different clothes. Let's talk about the difference between presence and availability. Your presence is who you are. Your personality, your warmth, your care, your humor, your softness, your loyalty, your way of loving. Availability is the access you offer, how quickly you respond, how much you forgive, how often you reopen the door, how willing you are to stay connected even when you're being neglected. In a healthy relationship, someone values your presence and honors your availability. They don't treat your availability like an unlimited resource. They protect it. They respect it. They don't pull away and then expect you to still be there the second they feel lonely. But in avoidant dynamics, what often happens is this: your presence becomes safe and comforting, but your availability becomes convenient. And convenience can be mistaken for love if you're craving reassurance. Because when someone returns, your nervous system registers it as safety. They came back, so I matter. They texted, so they care. They're watching my story, so I'm still in their mind. And the problem is, you can be in someone's mind and still not be held in their life with consistency. That's the twist. They can miss you without choosing you. They can want access without offering stability. They can return for relief, not for responsibility. So when you start disappearing, when you stop chasing, when you finally detach, the avoidant often feels something they don't like: loss of control. Not control over you as a person, but control over the pattern that kept them comfortable. Because your chasing used to be proof that the bond was still alive. Your forgiveness used to be proof that consequences were temporary. Your availability used to be proof that they could regulate through distance and still not truly lose you. When you remove that, their nervous system gets activated. They start wondering if the door is closing for real. They start questioning their assumptions. They start feeling uncertainty. And many avoidants respond to uncertainty by reaching, not to repair, but to re-secure access. That reach is often small and safe, a casual hey, a vague apology, a soft message, a little breadcrumb. It's designed to restore comfort without requiring accountability. And this is where the viewer usually loses, because the breadcrumb feels like hope. They treat the breadcrumb like a confession. They treat the hover like commitment. They give full access too quickly, because their body is relieved. And the moment full access returns, the avoidant calms down. The urgency fades, the discomfort disappears. And soon, the old pattern returns, distance, silence, mixed signals. Not because you weren't worth it, but because the system is back to giving them comfort without requiring them to grow. So this keynote tells the viewer something that sounds harsh, but is actually liberating. If they only come back when you're disappearing, they didn't love your presence. They loved your availability. In other words, they didn't return because they finally valued you properly. They returned because they felt you slipping out of reach. That realization can sting, because it challenges the fantasy that their return is the proof you waited for. But it also frees you, because it gives you a new way to judge the situation. You stop judging by contact. You start judging by capacity. You stop judging by words. You start judging by pattern. You stop asking, do they miss me? And you start asking, can they hold me? Because real love doesn't appear only when it's about to be lost. Real love doesn't require you to disappear to be respected. Real love shows up consistently, not only in moments of fear. Real love doesn't come back with breadcrumbs, it comes back with repair. So where do you stop being optional? You stop being optional when you stop offering optional access. You stop being optional when you connect closeness to consistency. You stop being optional when you stop rewarding returns that don't include accountability. You stop being optional when you no longer treat someone's anxiety about losing you as the same thing as their willingness to love you well. This is the moment your standards become your safety. You don't punish them. You don't play games. You don't act cold. You simply move differently. You move slowly. You require clarity. You require communication. You require a plan for what changes. You don't reopen the door just because they knocked. You ask, what will you do differently next time you feel overwhelmed and want to pull away? And you watch how they respond. If they respond with ownership and effort, you can rebuild. If they respond with vagueness, defensiveness, or another disappearing act, you don't chase. You don't negotiate. You don't shrink. You let that answer be the closure you used to beg for. Because the final win is not making them come back. The final win is refusing to be a place someone visits only when they're afraid to lose access. The final win is you becoming someone who is either chosen with intention or not accessed at all. And that is the moment the avoidant loses the old game and you finally win your life back.